User interface design for games is a big topic on its own, similar in size to effects and lighting and so on, and all the different things we've covered. The really great thing about user interface design is it's where we actually deal with the connection to the people playing our game. There's two big facets to our UI design we need to consider, and the first is the platform. Unity, as we've seen, can output to many, many different platforms, and that really affects how your game works and how people play it and perceive it. For example, we might be on a tablet or a phone, where there's no external control necessarily. We might have the ability to swipe, to tap, to spread, or something similar, but it might be on a small display. So we need to consider in this, because of that different form factor, where our elements sit for our UI, how we're going to interact with them, how big are people's fingers in the design of those buttons, and to what depth people are willing to go to get the information that they need. We also need to consider then how we do or do not want to clutter up that small screen. We might see something radically different with a console, such as the Xbox, for example. We'll see a dedicated controller with its own set of map buttons, and these afford some neat possibilities in how we get around our UI. They also provide a very dedicated input where there are known mappings for things that'll let us do different combos and access different parts of the UI, but it comes with its own constraints as well. If the player's hands are on that controller, we don't want to have them reach for something else or fumble around for buttons if somebody is coming after them. So we need to consider in our UI and in our input controls, what information are we giving them and how are they going to access it on this console? One of the really telling things in that UI and in the design is the platform, and that really shapes that and the mechanics, what we need to do in our game. I'll take a quick look here at some of the games I made with Unity, just to get an example. We can see there's games that are made for PC, that are action arcades, such as Staged Attacks, for example. We've got puzzles going on, where it may be better to drag or even type in something. We've got other games that are fast-moving, or maybe they use the gimbal in the phone to go back and forth. We've got racing games that are more dependent on movement and looking around necessarily than tapping on things, or full-motion action-adventure games, and those are going to use myriad controls. Here's something really telling that gives us a lot of indication about the UI controls we need and the interface of our player. A puzzle game called Prune, and I'll take a quick look at it. When we scroll down, right here in the description, this tells us a lot about the UI we want and the UI we need. With a swipe of a finger, grow and shape your tree into the sunlight while avoiding the dangers of a hostile world. This tells us, and we can see it here in the description, that it's going to be for mobile, that it's a 2D minimalist game. And these are both the game mechanics and game design dictating what are we going to do and how are we going to interact. This informs a lot of what we do in the UI design and tells us what we do or don't need on screen and what controls we need and where possibly we need external data displayed. So as we dive into UI design, we need to consider then a few basic things. Our platform. What are we designing our game for, or which platforms? What is the experience of our player in the game? Should they be seeing a bunch of information or be immersed in the game? What's the style of the game? Are we dealing in a heads-up display and a mounted trooper, or are we dealing in a cat running around a house? Each one has its own UI requirements. What are input controls, and do we need people to be able to navigate through menus in some way? And lastly, what's the overall look and feel? If we consider these as part of our UI rules, we'll call it, or at least UI guidelines, we'll get a very successful UI design that really fits our game and blends in seamlessly versus being laid on top and perceived as an addition to the game.